You know, there are places that are more than just buildings. Hindi lang sila semento at bakal. Some places actually have memories. Parang may weight yung hangin, di ba? Like you're walking down a hallway and you suddenly feel heavy. Like you're breathing in air that doesn't belong to you, but to the people who were there decades ago. If you're from DLSU, past or present, alam mo to. Taft Avenue has stood for over a century. 100 years of exams, graduations, and prayers, but also 100 years of things we can't explain. Tonight, we're going inside, from the quiet chapels to the dark hallways of SJ and Mutien-Marie. Let's talk about the stories that refuse to stay buried. Maybe your upperclassman told you about it during your first week. Or maybe you heard it from a kuya janitor while he was mopping the floors at 7 p.m. Or worse, maybe you felt it yourself. Yung biglang lalamig sa isang room even if the AC is off. Or that sound of footsteps behind you sa Velasco kahit alam mong mag-isa ka lang. Tonight, we're going to walk through the campus together, building by building, story by story. Hindi tayo magmamadali. We'll take our time because these aren't just jump scares. These are stories meant to linger. Something to think about while you're driving home or like sitting in your room tonight, wondering if the things we can't see are actually there. Just a quick reminder before we start. These stories were gathered from students, faculty, and old articles from student pubs over the years. Some are personal accounts, yung iba naman, urban legends na nag-evolve na. We can't verify everything, but they're all part of the history of this place. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon para lagi kang updated sa new episodes. So, let's begin. Let's step inside and listen to what the walls have to say. Welcome to Radyo Anino. Let's start with one of the most famous stories on campus. Mga dugo sa kapilya. You know, there was this one cold night, and this female student went into the chapel of the Most Blessed Sacrament. She was totally alone. It was finals week, so like many LaSallians before her, she went there to pray for her grades, her future, and just to find some comfort inside that silent, dimly lit space. She closed her eyes and started praying the Hail Mary. For a while, the only sound in the chapel was her own voice, steady and soft, echoing against walls that have stood there since 1939. But then, she heard footsteps. She tried to brush it off, diba? Thinking maybe it's just a janitor or another student staying late. She kept praying, but the footsteps didn't pass by. They got closer. And then, a voice. It was low at first, almost like a whisper, but it grew. It started chanting along with her. The same words, the same prayer. Someone or something was reciting the Hail Mary in total unison with her. Dahan-dahan niyang dinilat yung mga mata niya. And there, standing right in front of her, was a Japanese soldier. His uniform was torn and soaked in blood. His hands, mapula and literally dripping with blood, were cupped around her face. His mouth was open, pouring out blood, and he was crying. Hindi siya sumisigaw. He wasn't threatening her. He was just crying, as if he was begging for something she could never give. Iyan yung kwento that has been passed down from one generation of students to the next. It's one of many, and like all the stories you'll hear tonight, it begins in the same place, with blood, with history, and with a building that has seen more than most buildings should ever have to witness. The Temple of the Most Blessed Sacrament sits on the second floor of the south wing of St. LaSalle Hall. This is the oldest and most iconic building on the entire DLSU Manila campus. The hall itself was designed by Tomas Mapua, the first registered Filipino architect, the same man who founded Mapua University. It was built between 1920 and 1924, but the chapel came later. It was completed and dedicated on November 17, 1939. Even President Manuel Quezon and his wife Aurora attended the ceremony. The pews were carved from Nara wood, and the design was Art Deco, very elegant and modern for its time. It carried the Signum Fidei star, the symbol of the De La Salle brothers, and it was consecrated as a house of God, a place of peace and reverence. For 6 na taon, it was exactly that. But peace wouldn't last. When the Japanese imperial forces invaded Manila in January of 1942, they occupied most of the De La Salle College campus along Taft Avenue. At the time, the school's location, along what was then considered the outskirts of the city, gave it a bit of distance from the worst of the fighting in Intramuros and downtown. It also helped that several of the Christian brothers were German nationals. And since Germany was allied with Japan, the campus had this fragile protection, a temporary safe pass that allowed the school to keep operating even while the rest of the world was burning. But the American brothers weren't so fortunate. They were ordered out and eventually sent to a Japanese concentration camp in Los Baños, Laguna. They wouldn't be freed until February 1945. When American forces under General MacArthur finally liberated the camp. Meanwhile, the remaining European brothers were permitted to stay on the Taft Avenue campus, but they were confined to the chapel and a few small rooms while the Japanese occupied the rest of the building. Itong proteksyon, this quiet agreement, lasted for almost 3 years. 3 years of just enduring it, of quiet acceptance and the hope na hindi sila gagalawin as long as they didn't fight back. But when the Battle of Manila erupted in February 1945, that savage building-by-building fight between American forces and retreating Japanese troops, everything changed. It led to what we now know as the Manila Massacre, where over 100,000 civilians were killed. Families from the surrounding neighborhoods of Malate fled to the campus, hoping that the thick walls and the presence of a religious order would shield them from the bloodshed. At its peak, about 70 people were taking refuge inside. Women, children, 16 Christian brothers, the school chaplain, Father Francis Cosgrave, and the men of the Vasquez Prada, Carlos, and Cojuangco families. They really believed they were safe. Malakas ang pananampalataya nila na hindi sila gagalawin. But they were wrong. On February 7, 1945, a well-dressed Filipino, a hooded collaborator, guided Japanese soldiers into the college. He pointed out 2 men, Brother Egbert Xavier Kelly, the Irish director of the school who had devoted his life to the Philippines, and Judge Jose Carlos. The soldiers dragged them away to a nearby Japanese club. They were never seen again. Brother Egbert's body was never recovered. To this day, the Vatican is actually preserving his cause for beatification, recognizing his death as a potential martyrdom of faith. He may one day be declared a servant of God. 5 araw ang lumipas after that. 5 days of pure terror and waiting. The shelling outside was non-stop. On the eve of the massacre, February 11, Father Cosgrave said Mass and distributed communion amidst the terrifying sound of explosions hitting the school. It was the last Mass that many of those present would ever attend. Then came February 12th. Just after lunch, everyone had gathered at the foot of the staircase in the southern wing, seeking shelter from the shelling. The walls were shaking with every blast, and into the scene of terrified civilians huddling together, a Japanese officer entered with 20 soldiers. Their eyes were bloodshot. Accounts say they may have been intoxicated, driven to madness by the war and the desperation of men who knew they were losing everything. The officer shouted a command, and the soldiers just started bayoneting everyone. Men, women, children, some as young as 2 or 3 taong gulang. Kahit yung mga bata na hindi pa kayang lumakad ng maayos, sinaksak din. There was no discrimination. There was no mercy. Anyone who resisted was shot or cut down with a sword. Some brothers managed to escape up the stairs, but they were chased, bayoneted at the entrance of the chapel and then inside the chapel itself. Father Cosgrave, the chaplain, survived. He later described what happened next in an affidavit. When the soldiers were finished, they pulled and dragged the bodies into a heap at the foot of the stairs, the dead piled upon the living. Not many were killed outright. Most just slowly bled to death over the next few hours. The Japanese even attempted to violate the women who were dying from their wounds before they finally set the chapel on fire. 41 people died that day. Father Cosgrave, even though he was badly wounded himself, crawled among the bodies and the dying to administer the last rites and give absolution. The survivors, only about 10 of them, had to lie still among the dead for days, terrified that the Japanese would return. The smell of blood and death filled the building. It wasn't until February 14th, Valentine's Day of all days, that the American troops finally reached the campus and the ordeal ended. The chapel floor was literally soaked in blood. The walls were stained so deeply that, according to stories passed down through the decades, the blood could not be fully removed no matter how many times they repainted. Faint traces, they say, remain underneath the current coat of paint. The chapel was eventually rededicated in 1947 as a ceremony of reparation for the horrors that happened inside its walls. Today, you'll see a statue on the campus grounds by Peter de Guzman. It shows Father Cosgrave cradling a dying brother in his arms, a monument to sacrifice in the face of unimaginable cruelty. There's a marble plaque at the chapel entrance with the names of the 16 brothers who were killed. Every February 12th, the university holds a mass in their memory. In 2020, the National Historical Commission even installed a marker at the site. Kaya't huwag kayong magtaka kung bakit ang kapilyang itong maganda at tahimik na lugar, ay may ibang klaseng lamig pagpasok mo. Huwag kayong magtaka kung bakit ang ibang tao ay ayaw pumasok doon paggabi. But the dead, it seems, have their own way of remembering. Aside from the story of the Japanese soldier, there's another account of a graduate student attending her baccalaureate mass. This was supposed to be her moment. She went to the chapel to end her college journey in prayer, but instead of peace, she felt a presence beside her, praying along with her. When she looked, wala namang tao, at least no one that the others could see. Maintenance staff have shared their own experiences too. One worker mentioned to student journalists that while dramatic events don't happen often, he sometimes catches shadows floating around the chapel from the corner of his eye. Just movement where there should be none. And then there's the more elaborate version that's become almost mythic among LaSallians. The tale of a student who, while praying alone, saw the entire chapel transform. Blood everywhere, on every corner, every surface, as if the walls themselves were bleeding. a soldier collapsed on the floor with a bayonet in his chest, crawling toward her. And then, as she ran for the exit, a headless figure in a brother's rabat, that distinctive white collar, blocked her path. Now, this version has that urban legend quality that grows over time. It's hard to tell where the historical ends and the mythological begins. Pero ang punto ay iisa lang, ang kapilyang ito ay may mabigat na kasaysayan. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, there is a weight that hangs in the air inside those walls. A silence that is not quite silence. It's worth noting that a recent 2025 thesis from DLSU explored how the memory of the 1945 massacre has become entangled with these paranormal myths. The researchers found that many young LaSallians know the ghost stories, but they only have a vague understanding of the actual history. The documentary called for a more accurate commemoration, a reminder that before there were ghosts, there were people. Real people, with real names engraved on a plaque that most students walk past every day without even stopping to read. So the next time you step into the chapel of the Most Blessed Sacrament to pray for your grades or your future, maybe, just maybe, include a prayer for the souls who never left. Dahil mukhang patuloy pa rin silang nagdadasal kasama mo. There's this door on the ground floor of Brother Conan Hall, the building most LaSallians simply call SPS, that you've probably walked past 100 times without even noticing. It's near the student cooperative window. It's totally unremarkable. Wala kang iisiping kakaiba when you pass by it. Today, it leads to nothing. But once upon a time, it led to an elevator. And this elevator has its own story. Honestly, the darkest story of this entire building. The story goes like this. It was a Thursday, a happy Thursday, as some accounts describe it, because a long weekend was just around the corner. Everyone's to-do list was already about relaxation and stress release. There was this student, her name has been lost to time, or maybe people just deliberately chose not to speak it, who took the elevator, probably already daydreaming about her plans for the weekend. But then, the elevator broke down. She was trapped inside. Thursday night passed. The building emptied out. Friday came, but no one checked. Saturday, the campus was quiet. The hallways were still. Sunday, no classes, no personnel, no reason for anyone to even enter the building. Wala. It wasn't until Monday morning, 3 araw ang lumipas, when building personnel finally repaired the immobile elevator. That's when they made a discovery that would change the history of the SPS building forever. The student was dead. She died from suffocation, trapped in a small metal box with only panic, hunger, thirst, and slowly thinning air for company. Hindi natin alam how she felt inside. We don't know how many hours she spent screaming before her voice just gave out. We don't know exactly when she lost hope, if there was a moment where she just went quiet and waited for the end, or if she fought for her life until her very last breath. The only thing that remained was the consequence, a life lost, and a building that would be forever marked by that tragedy. Eventually, the elevator was shut down and banned from student use. But it wasn't just because of the mechanical failure. It was because of what started happening afterward. Reports circulated that anyone who stepped inside would feel cold hands touching them in the dark. The lights would switch off on their own, plunging that tiny space into total darkness. There were even stories of students and professors being found having fainted inside the elevator. People talked about cold, invisible hands reaching out. The hands of someone still trapped, still looking for help, still believing that if she could just touch someone, they would finally know she was there. It's believed that the spirit of that student still roams the SPS building. Kahit wala na yung elevator na yun, kahit napalitan na ng mas modernong facilities yung building, yung kwento, nanatili pa rin. It persists the way campus legends always do. Whispered in org rooms, shared during freshman orientation nights, or passed from upperclassmen to wide-eyed new students. Students who now glance at that unremarkable door by the co-op window and wonder what's really behind it. Even the dancers of LSDC Street, who rehearse on the upper floors sometimes until 10 o'clock in the evening, are often the last to leave. They're the ones tasked with switching off all the lights on their way dun. And over the years, they've reported catching glimpses of things that defy explanation. One dancer once described seeing a black-haired girl enter the bathroom past the drinking fountain on the 3rd floor late at night. He assumed it was just a fellow dancer who stayed behind after training. He even called out, "Uy, tara!" But there was no response. When he walked closer and checked, the bathroom was completely empty. The entire floor was empty. He had been alone the whole time. He kept replaying that memory over and over in his head. A girl, black hair, walking into the bathroom, and then nothing. As if she had just passed through the walls. Maaari bang imahinasyon lang? Siyempre, the mind plays tricks, lalo na when you're tired, the lights are off, and the hallways feel longer than they should. But when you're alone in a building with this kind of history, and you see something out of the corner of your eye that vanishes when you look again, it becomes really hard to convince yourself it was nothing. This next one is a bit smaller, quieter, pero honestly, it's no less strange. We're talking about the student DJs of Green Giant FM, the campus radio station. They had this tradition of broadcasting during a special event called the Green Light District. Their booth was located on the 5th floor of Velasco Hall. One night, after their shift was over, 5 of the DJs found themselves totally alone on that empty floor. The lights were already off. The entire building was completely still. And you know how it is when you're young and the adrenaline starts to mix with boredom, plus that specific thrill of being somewhere you're not supposed to be after hours. They decided to test the darkness. They entered the empty room directly across from their broadcast booth, stood at the very back, and called out, "If anyone is here, give us a sign. We come in peace." Katahimikan. Nothing moved. Nothing answered. They just laughed it off, returned to their booth, and eventually forgot all about it. But a few days later, one of those DJs was sharing the story with a colleague while the two of them were walking toward the elevator on that same empty 5th floor of Velasco. And right before the elevator doors closed, in that final sliver of space, just before the gap disappeared, they heard it. Clink, a coin, dropping on the floor right behind them. Metal on tile. It was a single, clear note in the middle of the silence. Wala silang nakitang tao. Wala rin silang nakitang kahit anong barya sa sahig before they stepped into the elevator. Just the sound. One coin. And then, silence. One of the DJs later said that the experience made everyone in the station rethink every random coin they had ever seen on the floor and picked up. See, in certain Filipino beliefs, coins that appear out of nowhere are considered offerings or invitations from entities seeking attention. And the DJs had just days earlier literally asked for a sign. Lumalabas na may sumagot. But it took its time. It waited for the absolute right moment, the closing of the elevator doors, the narrowing of the gap, the exact second when it would be too late to look back and confirm what you actually heard. Kapag nag-alok ka ng imbitasyon sa dilim, huwag kang magtaka kung may tumangap. Kung may isang gusali sa Salle University na paulit-ulit na binabanggit sa tuwing usapang kababalaghan, kung may isang pangalan na laging sinasambit ng may bahid ng kilabot, iyon ang St. Joseph Hall, or simply SJ. For nearly 6 decades, this building has housed science laboratories, preserved specimens, and the kinds of rooms that smell like formaldehyde and old ambition. During the day, it is unremarkable. Pero pagdating ng gabi, lalo na sa 4th floor, parang may ibang mundo na bumubukas. Actually, student journalists from the LaSallian have investigated this building not once, not twice, but at least 4 times across different generations. In 2010, 2013, 2018, and 2024. And every single time, SJ has delivered something. Hindi lahat ng gusali ay may ibibigay kapag hinahanap mo, but SJ always has something waiting in the dark. Take the night of September 20th, 2013. 8 staffers decided to spend the night on campus. They entered SJ through the skywalk, that covered bridge connecting SJ's 3rd floor to Miguel Hall. The moment they crossed in, the atmosphere shifted. The hallway was dark and long, and the air carried this stillness that made them hyper-aware of every single sound. Their breathing, their heartbeats, even the rustle of their jackets. They climbed to the 4th floor around 10:40 in the evening. There was rain pounding against the windows outside, but inside, all the windows were shut. No wind. The air was perfectly, unnaturally still. As they walked down the corridor, one of them noticed the door of the girl's comfort room. It was ajar and swinging, back and forth. In a steady, rhythmic motion, hindi siya gentle, and it didn't look random. It looked deliberate, like someone was pushing it from behind at measured intervals. There was no draft, there was no wind. There was absolutely no explanation. April, one of the writers, stepped closer than anyone else. She watched the door, trying to stay calm and focused. But then, something shifted. Her expression just broke. Fear replaced calm in an instant, and she turned and ran without saying a single word. Everyone else followed. Tumakbo silang lahat through the long hallway. Imagine the scene. Screams mixing with the flash of cameras and the sound of feet pounding on linoleum. And just before they reached the opposite end, another door slammed shut. This time from the boys' comfort room. It was as if whatever was behind the girls' door had moved impossibly fast to the other side of the hallway. They didn't stay to investigate. Bumaba sila at lumabas agad ng SJ. Later on, April explained what she saw. A black figure, not just a person or a shadow, but a dark shape with the suggestion of a body, appeared to move from behind the restroom door. When it seemed to step into the hallway toward her, that was it. She had to get out. Others confirmed they saw something too, hindi sapat na madedescribe with certainty, but they knew it was there. But the story of SJ didn't end that night. Past midnight, the group returned. One member, Izzy, walked ahead toward the building. As soon as he faced SJ, the wind blew against him, hard, literally pushing him backward. When he retreated, the wind stopped. He turned to try again, and the wind returned. Parang may nagsasabi sa kanya, huwag ka nang bumalik. They ignored the warning. At 3:20 in the morning, They stood at one end of the fourth floor corridor. The hallway was lit to about halfway, but beyond that was absolute darkness. The restroom door at the far end was completely invisible. Rex and Izzy walked into the corridor, stopping just where the light ended. And then the darkness moved. It didn't just flicker, it advanced. It rolled toward them, swallowing the walls, the floors, and the ceiling, nearly reaching their feet. Sumigaw sila. They all ran. In 2018, a new group returned to SJ. They brought William, a student who reportedly had an open third eye. On the fourth floor, they noted how the corridor felt stretched, longer than any floor in any other building. William's flashlight, which was strong enough to illuminate hallways everywhere else, weirdly could not reach the end of this one. He aimed the beam at the girls' restroom mirror. At first, the light reflected back, confirming it was just a normal hallway. But then, the mirror went black. The reflection vanished. It was as if something had stepped between the flashlight and the glass, absorbing all the light, parang may kumain ng liwanag. Right after that, a door beside one of the members creaked open. Again, no wind, all windows shut. They retreated, and as they walked away from SJ through the ground-level path, William glanced back. He saw a girl, black shoulder-length hair, white shirt, moving past the pillars of SJ Walk. He looked again, and wala na. It took his brain 3 seconds to process the delay between seeing and understanding. Even during the 2024 exploration, another group from the LaSallian visited SJ. Their investigation was limited to school hours, but even then, 2 members on the 5th floor heard it. 3 solid knocks from a classroom door right beside them. They confirmed with each other that they both heard it, and they ran to catch up with the group. When they returned to check, the knocking had stopped. The classroom was completely empty. Ano nga ba ang mayroon sa 4th floor ng St. Joseph Hall? Interestingly, walang nai-record na kamatayan na nakatali doon. Walang sunog, walang major tragedy connected to that particular hallway or comfort room. But the pattern is consistent across decades. Multiple groups, independently, years apart, reporting the same things. Swinging doors, black figures, darkness that moves. That heavy feeling of being watched by something that clearly prefers the 4th floor. May mga bagay talaga na hindi kailangang ipaliwanag para maging totoo. In SJ, lalo na yung 4th floor, seems to hold something that has been there for a very, very long time. This next story is a bit different. It's from that 2018 overnight expedition, and honestly, it's not dramatic at all. There are no slamming doors, no shadowy figures lurking in the corner. In fact, it's quiet, almost pleasant. But in a lot of ways, this is the most unsettling detail of the whole night. From the very start of that investigation, a writer named Denise noticed this sweet, fragrant scent in the air. She just mentioned it casually as they were moving between buildings. She thought it was just fresh air or maybe the scent of newly cut grass and the plants around campus. Her companion smelled it too, but nobody really thought much of it at the time. But then, the scent started following them everywhere, through SJ, into Miguel Hall, through the warp zone connecting Miguel to Gokongwei, even into the faculty center. No matter what hallway, stairwell, or dark corridor they entered, it was there. Matamis, mabango, like flowers blooming in the middle of the night. William, the member with the third eye, recognized it immediately. He knew it was Sampaguita, but he didn't say a word. Hindi niya sinabi. He just let Denise keep believing it was grass. He let the others dismiss it. For hours, he carried that knowledge alone while they walked through the dark. See, in Filipino folklore, the sudden, unexplained scent of sampaguita is one of the most widely recognized signs of a supernatural presence. It's not violent or threatening, it's actually quite tender. It's like a whisper of fragrance in the air, a way for someone who is no longer alive to let you know that they are walking right beside you. Nagpaparamdam lang. After the group finally returned to the office, they compared notes with another campus media organization, the Archers Network, who had been conducting their own parallel investigation that same night. The Archers Network team included someone described as a psychic, who was actually a biology major. When they started sharing their experiences, the psychic confirmed exactly what William already knew. And then, they delivered the one piece of information that just silenced the entire room. There was no sampaguita growing anywhere on the DLSU Manila campus grounds. Wala. Not in the gardens. Not along the walkways. Not in any planter or courtyard. There wasn't a single sampaguita plant anywhere on campus. The scent that had followed them the entire night, from LS to SJ to Miguel to the warp zone, couldn't have come from any living plant. It came from somewhere else, or from someone else. KC, another one of the writers, later described how every whiff of sampaguita after that point just made her want to run. The scent was beautiful, sure, but beauty doesn't belong in empty, dark hallways at 3 in the morning. A scent that should have been relaxing and comforting turned into something terrifying. None of the staffers who were there that night have been able to smell sampaguita the same way again. What was once just our national flower, something innocent and fragrant that you'd see in garlands along the streets, now carries a different meaning for them, a different weight. Because on that night, something walked with them through every single building and every darkened floor of De La Salle, and it smelled like flowers. If there's a building in DLSU that looks like a horror movie set, even in the middle of the day, it's Mutien-Marie Hall. Most of us know it simply as MM. It resembles, more than anything else, an abandoned hospital. Even when the sun is bright on the rest of the campus, that dim, heavy hush of Mutien-Marie stays undisturbed. The walls are thin, the corridors are narrow, and they carry sound in these really strange ways. Very few regular classes are held there, so for most of the year, it just sits dormant. Parang isang gusaling natutulog na ayaw gisingin. But once a year, the Harlequin Theater Guild stages its annual Haunted Hall inside. It's a walk-through horror attraction that's become one of the most anticipated events of University Week. Students line up for hours, pay for tickets, and walk through the darkened building, while actors in full costume and makeup leap from the shadows to scare them. But here's the part that every Harlequin member knows, but rarely tells the paying public. They don't actually need to create all the scares. The building provides some for free. The members of Harlequin consider MM their second home. They spend weeks there preparing, building sets, rehearsing, painting props, and even sleeping on the floor during production week because going home just seems like too much effort. And during those long, late nights, they've encountered things that can't be explained by costumes or sound design. There have been times when songs would play from the speakers on their own, not tracks that were cued, not music that anyone selected. Speakers that were supposed to be completely off would suddenly emit sound, playing backtracks that no one had triggered. Belongings go missing and reappear in spots where no one placed them. And then there are the temperature drops, sudden, sharp cold spots in rooms that have no air conditioning and zero ventilation. One room in particular has a certain reputation, MM24. The members speak about it with a mix of familiarity and caution. Ang dami talaga sa MM24, they agree. The specifics of what ang dami actually means are often left unstated, as if naming the things would make them more real than the members are comfortable with. Then there's the incident of the padlocked room. 2 members were once peering through the windows of a sealed, locked door, a room that maintenance confirmed no one had access to. As they watched, the lights inside suddenly switched on. Full brightness, from nothing. No explanation was ever found. And we can't forget the story of the look-alike. A trainer and an alumnus were making their rounds during a haunted hall season when they encountered one of the actors walking through a hallway. But the person's face was vacant, blank. He didn't respond when they called out his name. Hindi niya sinagot. Hindi niya pinansin. He just walked past them as though they didn't even exist. The real actor? He was outside, sitting with the rest of the crew, and had been there the entire time. Sino ang naglakad sa pasilyo? One of the LaSallian brothers actually confirmed to Harlequin members that both playful and not-so-playful spirits inhabit Mutien-Marie. The building is even blessed before every haunted hall season, a ritual that tells you the institution itself takes these stories seriously enough to provide spiritual protection. And here's the thought that the Harlequin members themselves find both hilarious and terrifying. During the haunted hall, participants walk through a building full of actors dressed as ghosts and monsters. But hidden among those performers, among the hands that reach out from doorways and the figures standing motionless in dark corners, may mga hindi kasali sa production. Hindi lahat ng multo sa Mutien-Marie ay may costume at script. Some of them have always been there. The Enrique M. Razon Sports Center, or simply Razon, is basically the athletic heart of DLSU. You've got basketball courts, a swimming pool, a gym, and all the training facilities. During the day, it's full of life, the sound of sneakers squeaking on hardwood and coaches' whistles echoing everywhere. It's probably the last place you would associate with hauntings, right? Pero kapag gabi, ibang kwento na yun. Campus lore actually includes this famous tale about the headless basketball team that appears on the 9th floor after dark, just shooting hoops in an empty gym. It sounds like a total joke when you're talking about it in broad daylight. Pero it sounds way less funny when you're actually standing on that 9th floor at midnight and the darkness is so dense that you literally can't see beyond arm's length. In 2014, 10 staffers from the LaSallian decided to spend the night at Razon. When they reached the 9th floor, the elevator doors opened to what they described as a wall of cold, heavy air. The silence was absolute. They sat in a circle, right at center court, turned off all their lights, and just waited. First, they heard a door click. Then, whistling coming from the shower rooms, and they were sure it wasn't the wind or the pipes. It was someone whistling a tune in a room that was supposed to be empty. And then, the sound of weight settling onto the wooden bleachers. Ang kaluskos ng kahoy. The distinct creak of someone sitting down and adjusting their position. All 10 of them heard it. The security guard had already returned to the first floor. They were completely alone. Even the Razon elevators added to the experience. The elevator would stop and open at the 6th floor repeatedly, even though no one was pressing the button. When the entire group rode it together, it suddenly triggered the overload warnings. The exact same group that had ridden it without any issues just minutes before. It was as if something unseen had stepped into the elevator with them, adding weight that simply shouldn't have been there. A security guard also shared some stories from his colleagues. One worker once fell asleep on the 2nd floor and woke up choking. He felt hands around his throat that he couldn't see. When he finally forced his eyes open, he saw a white figure heading toward the canteen. Now, here's the weird part. A construction worker from across the street had the exact same experience. He woke up with a choking sensation, and when he opened his eyes, he saw a white figure that appeared to be hanging from the 2nd floor of Razon. Dalawang magkaibang tao, dalawang magkaibang gabi, parehong sinakal and parehong nakakita ng puting figura. Days later, a De La Salle brother who claimed he could see spirits told one of the group members that the ground floor of Razon is actually among the most haunted areas in the entire university. He said he regularly sees creatures floating around the swimming pool and hears voices coming from inside the building. His advice was implied but very clear. If you ever find yourself at the swimming pool, huwag kang tumingin sa itaas. The Brother Andrew Gonzalez Hall is definitely one of the newest buildings on campus. It's tall, modern, and very sleek. You wouldn't really expect a glass and steel skyscraper to have old-school ghost stories, right? But Andrew has already begun collecting its own legends. And the most consistent accounts don't come from the students, but from the people who know the building best after dark, the cleaning staff. Multiple janitors working on completely different floors have independently reported the same terrifying experience, falling asleep during their breaks and entering bangunggot. You know that Filipino form of sleep paralysis, where your body is totally frozen but your mind is wide awake. You can see and hear everything around you, but you can't move, you can't scream, and you definitely can't escape. And sa panaginip nila, they all see the exact same thing. A woman in white, wearing a veil, just standing there silently, staring. One janitor recalled falling asleep near the platform of room A1402. In her dream, the woman appeared. White dress, white veil, watching her with these completely unreadable eyes. The janitor tried to scream. She could feel the effort, the strain, and the sheer desperation in her throat. But no sound came out. Sumisigaw na siya, pero hindi siya makabangon. When she finally woke up, she was gasping for air. Her co-worker who was nearby immediately asked, "Did you turn on the aircon?" Because suddenly, the room had become freezing cold. But they hadn't touched the controls. Wala silang binukas na aircon. When the janitor started comparing notes later on, the discovery was chilling in its simplicity. Multiple people, separate incidents, different days. But it was always the same woman. Same white dress, same veil, the same silent, watchful presence. Sino siya? Interestingly, unlike the chapel or St. LaSalle Hall, there is no recorded death in Andrew that matches this description. No nun, no patient, no known tragedy specific to this building. Pero for the cleaning staff who have worked there for a long time, she is very real. She's as real as the mops they carry and the floors they scrub every single night. There are other whispers from Andrew too, like accounts of a nun who vanished on one of the upper floors after being chased by security guards. And then there's the one about the decapitated man in a barong Tagalog, reportedly seen seated calmly on the 14th floor. These stories definitely carry that flavor of legends that grow every time they're retold. But enough different people have mentioned them that they've become a permanent part of Andrew's identity. In a building that's supposed to represent the future of the university, it seems some things from the past, or some things we just can't explain, have already moved in. This is the story that really stays with you even after the others have faded. Hindi dahil ito yung pinaka-dramatic, but because it is the most quiet. One Monday, si Hannah and her friend went to the library to work on their research paper. They went up to the third floor, settled at a desk, and just started working. Since they needed more sources, Hannah was busy looking for books, while her friend excused herself to go to the bathroom. After a while, her friend returned and sat down next to her. They worked side by side in silence. Yung comfortable silence na normal lang between people who know each other really well. Everything felt completely fine. Normal lang. Then, her friend stood up and walked toward the bookshelves behind them. Hannah assumed she was just looking for more reference books. But minutes passed and hindi pa siya bumabalik. More minutes went by. Still nothing. Hannah eventually stood up to check and found her friend asleep at a different desk nearby. She tried to wake her up, nudged her, called her name, pero wala. Hindi gumagalaw. Frustrated and a bit confused, Hannah went back to their original desk, but sitting there, busy writing notes, was her friend. Her friend looked up and told her she had never left the desk. Sabi niya, she had been there the whole time. Imagine how confused Hannah was at that moment. Naguluhan talaga siya. So she went back to the sleeping figure across the room. It was still there. She walked closer. She really wanted to see the face, to confirm to herself that it was someone else and na nagkamali lang siya. She leaned in. It wasn't her friend. Hindi man lang kamukha. In fact, the figure had no face at all. Wala itong mukha. Hannah screamed and ran out of the library as fast as she could. This story lingers because of what came before the horror, yung minutes of normalcy. Hannah was sitting right beside something that wasn't even human, working in that companionable silence, completely unaware. Ilang minuto siyang katabi niyon. Think about that. How many minutes did she spend feeling safe next to something that didn't have a face? Iyon yung totoong nakakatakot, hindi lang yung walang mukha, kundi yung fact na akala mo tao yung katabi mo, pero hindi pala. If you've ever walked through St. Miguel Hall, you've probably noticed its unusually wide hallways. Some people claim those are actually remnants of its supposed past as a hospital. It has that specific architectural vibe, diba? And the stories from this area are constant. Professors and staff over at the adjacent faculty offices in William Hall have reported all sorts of things. Whispers echoing on the 6th floor, the distinct sound of typing on keyboards coming from empty offices, and even chairs spinning on their own in the middle of the 3rd floor. But the most poignant, and honestly, the most heartbreaking story from this area involves a computer and a song. There was this photo shoot staffer who had a close student friend. Tragically, that friend died from choking during a photo shoot just days before her graduation day. That same evening, the staffer was alone in the office, staying late to arrange some photographs. It was around 7 in the evening, and the room was completely empty. Suddenly, her computer turned on by itself, and it started playing the graduation march. Hindi niya binuksan. She didn't press a single key. The screen just lit up out of nowhere, and the music started playing. Naturally, she was spooked, so she turned it off and tried to go back to her work. But then, the computer turned on again, and for the second time, that graduation song filled the empty room. This time, she didn't wait around. She ran. But later on, when she was already home, the realization finally settled in. Her friend, the girl who had died that very day, never actually got to graduate. She never got the chance to walk across the stage. She never got to hear the song that was supposed to mark the culmination and the fulfillment of all her years in college. Hindi naman talaga nakakatakot yung kwentong ito. Nakakalungkot siya. The spirit didn't want to harm anyone or cause a scene. She just wanted to hear her song. Gusto lang niyang marinig ang graduation march kahit isang beses lang. And somehow, in that quiet, empty office, a computer gave her that last moment. Before we finally end tonight's episode, there are a few more fragments, stories that are maybe too brief to stand alone, but definitely too important to leave out. These are the small, chilling moments that have been whispered in the hallways for years. First, let's talk about Yuchenko Hall. There was this student just washing his hands in the bathroom one evening when he heard footsteps approaching. They were getting louder and louder. He finished up, went to the elevator, and pressed the button. Just as the doors were closing, in that very final gap before they shut completely, he saw him, a man in white, completely drenched in blood, running toward him and screaming. The doors shut. Wala nang ibang nakita. Wala nang ibang narinig. Just that haunting memory of a blood-soaked figure running toward a closing door, forever arriving just a second too late. Then we have the STRC, the Science and Technology Research Center. This is where thesis students basically live during their all-nighters. One student, while waiting for the elevator, watched the doors open to reveal a woman in white with very long hair. But here's the thing. Only the upper half of her body was there. Walang ibaba. No legs, no waist, just nothing below. She was just hovering in the elevator as if gravity didn't apply to her, or as if only part of her had managed to remain in this world. Over at Velasco Hall, specifically room 305, there's a story about an unexplained cold. It's not from the air conditioning, and it's not from open windows. It's just a localized cold that exists in that room and nowhere else. It's as though the room itself is holding on to something that lowers the temperature, simply by being there. And then there's the William Shaw Little Theater. A child has been seen laughing and running around there in the dead of night. A child who clearly doesn't belong. When the Harlequin Theater Guild moved their haunted hall there for their 7th season, they actually found the location way more unsettling than Mutien-Marie. It got to the point where group prayers at 3 a.m. became a necessity. Something about that theater seemed to resist their presence, or maybe it just resented having to share its space with the living. And finally, back at Razon, specifically the swimming pool. According to a De La Salle brother who has the ability to see spirits, there are entities that just float in the water. He says they are always there, just drifting. His advice remains the same. If you're ever there, huwag kang tumingin sa itaas. Nagtapos na tayo. We've walked through the chapel of the Most Blessed Sacrament, kung saan tumulo yung dugo ng 41 souls on the floor of a house of God. We stood in the hallways of St. Joseph Hall, kung saan yung dilim moves on its own and the doors swing even without the wind. Naamoy natin yung sampagita in places where nothing grows. Narinig natin yung graduation march in an empty room. and we tried our best not to look back in those hallways where it feels like someone or something is following us. These stories span decades. They've been told by students, janitors, security guards, professors, and even the brothers. They've been investigated by student journalists who spent their nights on campus when the rest of the world was asleep, armed with nothing but flashlights, courage, and a prayer. Siyempre, not all of these stories can be verified. Not all of them happened exactly as described. That's just the nature of oral tradition. Details shift, embellishments grow, and the line between what was actually seen and what was just felt becomes blurred over time. Pero yung consistency, that's what really matters. Across generations, across different groups of people who didn't even know each other, across years that separate one investigation from the next, the same buildings always come up, the same floors, the same heavy feelings. SJ's fourth floor, the chapel, the sampaguita, the elevators, it's always the same. The Harlequin Theater Guild's artistic director, Rafi Tejada, once said something really important, that ghost stories should be contextualized rather than just sensationalized. He wanted to show that all entities in this universe share a spatial coexistence, na we should respect and understand them instead of just being afraid. The ghosts, if they are actually there, were once people. Naglakad sila sa parehong mga pasilyo, nagdasal sila sa parehong kapilya, umiyak sila sa parehong mga silid. Huwag nating kalimutan yon. De La Salle University has stood along Taft Avenue for more than a century. Its cornerstone was laid way back in 1920. It has survived a world war, a massacre, fires, floods, political upheaval, and just the quiet, relentless passage of time. Through all of it, people have walked its halls. Students building their futures, teachers shaping minds, brothers offering their lives in service, and the janitors and guards keeping watch when everyone else has gone home. Ang ilan sa kanila ay nakauwi. Ang ilan, hindi. At kung minsan, kapag tahimik na ang campus and the lights are switched off one by one, and the hallways are empty except for the shadows and the wind, may mga naiiwan. May mga hindi umaalis. And it's not because they're angry. It's not because they want to scare you or make you suffer. Siguro, gusto lang nilang malaman na naaalala pa rin sila. Na may nakakarinig pa sa kanila. Na kahit mahigit 80 years na ang lumipas since that day sa kapilya, may nagdarasal pa rin para sa kanila. Kaya sa susunod na papasok ka sa campus ng LaSalle, kapag mag-isa kang naglalakad sa pasilyo pagkatapos ng klase, o nagdarasal ka sa kapilya bago mag-exam, o naghihintay ka ng elevator sa isang gusali na wala ng ibang tao, and you feel something you just cannot explain. A chill that doesn't come from the AC. A scent of flowers in a hallway where no flowers grow. A sound behind you, footsteps, a whisper, or the drop of a coin in a place where you're supposed to be alone. Huwag kang tumakbo agad. Huminto ka saglit. Take a deep breath. Huminga ka ng malalim. At magdasal ka para sa kanila. Dahil minsan, ang kailangan lang naman nila is one person who will stop and listen. Someone who will say, naaalala ko kayo. At iyon siguro, ang pinakamahalaga sa lahat ng mga dasal. At doon nagtatapos ang ating kwento para sa gabing ito sa Radyo Anino. Salamat sa pakikinig mga kaibigan. Whether you're stuck in traffic, working the night shift, or just craving a taste of home from abroad. Kung may kwento kang gustong ibahagi, i-comment below o i-send sa amin. Huwag kalimutang mag-like, subscribe, at share para sa higit pang lihim na bumubulong sa dilim. Hanggang sa susunod na gabi, stay safe out there. Good night.